Former President Donald Trump will be in Texas this weekend to rally his base as Texas gears up for the primaries. Trump held a Save America rally in Arizona last weekend. It was his first rally of the new year. Mr. Trump expected to play a central role in the primaries and midterm elections this year. GOP candidates in every race have vied for his endorsement, including the top two state leaders in Texas. Here to talk about this is former Texas GOP Chairman James Dickey and Jamarr Brown, the co-executive director of the Texas Democratic Party. James, is Donald Trump the kingmaker, or is he going to be the king and run again?
Well, it's too early to know. I don't think anybody's going to know that till after the 22 election. But what I love is the contrast between President Trump coming for a giant rally and people being very excited about it, and him endorsing Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, and many others, and those endorsements being welcomed and appreciated, and the rally being welcomed and appreciated, where in Georgia just last week, the sitting president of the United States, Stacey Abrams, couldn't bother to show up when he came to her state of Georgia. There's a big disconnect between the positive relationship on the Republican side and the discord on the Democrat side.
Okay, you know, Jamarr, talking about Texas GOP lawmakers seeking the endorsement of Trump, a twice impeached president. From the Democratic side, with the Republican opponent gets the Trump endorsement, do you see that as an advantage or a disadvantage?
Well, what I think I see it as is a detriment to voters across Texas. What we've seen from Greg Abbott, Dan Patrick, and Ken Paxton has been dangerous and extremist policies, and their allegiance and their loyalty to Donald Trump and not to the voters, not to the people of Texas. We saw Greg Abbott, call for an audit actually after the election that Donald Trump clearly lost. We saw Ken Paxton lead an unsuccessful lawsuit, all for an election that Donald Trump lost. And all of that was at the will of Donald Trump. And so that's what we're seeing in these particular endorsements. And the question has to be, are they loyal to the people of Texas? Or are they loyal to Donald Trump and his extremist policies that they're governing under?
Talking about loyalty, James Dickey, all those Trump voters, the deplorables, as Hillary Clinton put it, are they still there? Well, if Trump says vote for candidate A, will all those people vote for candidate A the way they voted for him when he ran for president? Is that loyalty still there?
Well, of course, it's not the same, although, like I said, the Democrats right now don't even have it while they're in office. It's not the same, but we've seen this for a long time. Bill Clinton did a lot of endorsements after he was out of office. President Obama did less, but still did endorsements after he was out of office. And in fact, it was a big deal that he had endorsed Hillary Clinton and not Joe Biden to run to be his successor. So it's very common for former elected officials to provide their endorsement and for voters to take that into consideration, just like they take everything else.
Jamarr, final word here. What do you think the impact is really going to be if Donald Trump endorses one Texas candidate over another? How big is that impact?
Well, I think the impact that you see is what I said earlier, as along the lines of the dangerous policies that the Republicans have passed into Texas. We talk about the voter suppression law that they've passed. We talk about restriction to reproductive health care. We talk about how they're trying to rewrite history as we speak, and even to the effect where they're insurrectionists who are now running for office to be in the systems of government and our democracy. And so it is absolutely extremist and is absolutely dangerous, not only Donald Trump's endorsement and involvement, but the impact in terms of people who serve in office where they're supposed to be serving the will of the people and not just one man who lost an election.
All right. Well, Trump is coming to the state regardless. We got to wrap this. Jamarr, James, thank you both very much.
Absolutely.
Thank
Take
you.
care.